The driveway was still cracked from the last frost, but the house looked untouched, like nothing ever changed. Except me. I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers ached. Inside my briefcase, the award glinted beneath a folded blouse. IEE fellow. I hadn't told a soul. Through the windshield, I saw the porch light flicker. My father's boots by the steps, my mother's petunias in mismatched pots, and in my chest that hollow echo of every dinner I left in silence. I wasn't invited back, I just showed up. 6 years. Not a single call to ask if I was eating. Not one text after I paid their mortgage twice. And tonight, I'd walk into that kitchen again where my name was only used when they needed help. The last time I sat at that table, Mom served meatloaf with the same cold smile. "You should really think about getting a real job, Lauren," she'd said, sipping from her chipped wine glass. Claire laughed. "She's still doing that tech nonsense," I smiled, swallowed the burn, and wired $2,000 to cover Dad's ER bill. The scent of baked apples hit me as I opened the door. Claire's heels clicked on the tile. David's laugh rumbled from the den, and my name wasn't mentioned. I stepped into the dining room, heels sinking into the worn carpet. Susan turned startled. Her eyes flicked to my bag, then to me. "Oh, Lauren, we weren't expecting you." Claire raised a glass. "Well, this is nostalgic." She was wearing my college sweatshirt, the one I'd left behind when I moved to DC. It hung on her like a trophy. I took a seat. The chair wobbled, still broken, still mine. The table shimmered with store-bought wine paper napkins, pot roast. The scent was rich, but I couldn't taste anything. Mom carved the meat with too much force. Claire scrolled through her phone. "I heard Apex Systems is laying people off," she said. I looked at her, dead in the eye. "I wouldn't know. I'm not getting laid off." Dad grunted. "You still working from coffee shops or whatever," Susan sighed. "She's always had unconventional paths." I inhaled, exhaled. "I'm leading a cybersecurity project." $300 million, I said. Quiet, even, no one blinked. I pulled out the badge, placed it beside the wine. My name engraved in gold. Rachel Nguyen's signature beneath. Claire stared. Dad's fork froze midair. Susan's lips parted, but nothing came out. "You work at Apex," Claire whispered. "I built the system you use," I said. The silence was brittle, like glass on the edge of a table. I stood, straightened my blazer. "I'm speaking at the conference tomorrow. You'll hear my name." They said nothing. For once, I didn't shrink. "Would you fight back or walk away? Where are you listening from? Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family?" The smell of burnt coffee lingered in my rental car. I'd forgotten how cold Ohio mornings could feel even in spring. The air was thick with pollen nostalgia and something heavier. Disappointment. Driving past the elementary school where I won my first science fair, I remembered holding up that little plastic trophy, beaming. Mom never came. She was busy taking Claire to ballet. I was 11. I biked home alone that day, medal bouncing in my pocket. Claire got flowers after every recital. I got silence. I shook the memory off as the GPS chimed. 2 minutes from home. But where was home, really? Not that split-level house with peeling shutters. Not the living room with fading carpet and a dusty treadmill no one used. That house was a stage, and I had always been the understudy. Even in high school, I coded websites for local businesses under the covers at night. My laptop glowed while the rest of the house slept. It helped pay for college later, since no one else could. At family dinners, Claire would talk about her sorority life, the brand of her new heels, or some ad campaign she liked. Mom would nod proud. If I mentioned back-end design or cybersecurity trends, Dad would grunt. Claire would yawn. "Don't bore us, Lauren," Mom once said, slicing into meatloaf. "It's Thanksgiving." But when Dad's heart attack came, guess who maxed out their emergency card? Guess who wired the mortgage payments for 5 months while Claire booked a weekend spa retreat? They never asked where the money came from. They just expected it to keep coming. I still remember watching my savings drain from a cafe in DC. My phone buzzed with another, "Hey, could you help us just this once?" Another once. Another $2 $800. No thank yous, no calls, just silence. I started journaling after that. It was cheaper than therapy back then. "You're being dramatic," Susan once said when I brought up feeling unappreciated. "You always were sensitive." No, I was just tired of pretending I didn't notice, of being invisible while building an empire behind a screen. The first time I saw Claire's new condo, I lied through my teeth. "It's beautiful," I said, glancing at the granite countertops I partially funded. She'd used her bonus to decorate. I'd used mine to cover Dad's blood pressure medication. Claire offered me boxed wine and bragged about her office's culture days. I nodded politely, ignoring the ache in my jaw from clenching it too tight. No one asked how DC was treating me. No one asked if I had someone waiting for me back home, because I didn't. My work was the only thing that never let me down. Even my therapist once said, "Your family doesn't need to believe in you for you to be real." That sentence stayed with me longer than any holiday invitation. Not that there were many. I'd stopped attending Christmas 3 years ago. The last one ended with Claire gifting Mom a spa package, then turning to me and saying, "Oh, I didn't know you were coming." I'd brought personalized journals, thoughtful gifts, baked cookies. They stayed unopened. The journals still sat in their shrink wrap on Susan's bookshelf. That winter, I took a solo trip to Seattle. Cold, rainy, quiet. Just how I liked it. I watched strangers hug at Pike Place Market and felt less alone than I ever did at the Mitchell dinner table. Back home, my group chat with college friends stayed muted. They posted baby showers, renovations, beach selfies. I posted code commits and project milestones. They never asked what I did. They just knew it involved tech. Sometimes I wondered if I'd built this distance myself, walled myself in with achievements hoping someone would knock. No one ever did, until Rachel Nguyen emailed me after a conference panel. Subject line, "Your insights saved our system." I reread that message 10 times. No one in my family ever said I saved anything, not even when I bailed them out repeatedly. That email turned into a Zoom call, then an offer, then a clearance badge, then a title, lead cybersecurity consultant, Apex Systems. Still, I didn't tell my family, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew they wouldn't understand it. Or worse, they wouldn't care. So I stayed silent and built my legacy in private. The day the IEE award arrived, I was alone in my apartment. It came in a thick matte black envelope with gold lettering. I sliced it open with a letter opener my father once gave me. He said every professional needed one. He never expected I'd use it to open my own accolades. The certificate was heavy, heavier than their opinions. My name, Lauren Elise Mitchell, etched above the words, "Fellow for Contributions to National Infrastructure Security." I sat there holding it in both hands. No champagne, no family clapping in the background. Just the low hum of my dishwasher and the fading evening light. I took a photo, but never posted it. Instead, I tucked the award into a leather folder, the same one I'd later carry into the Apex conference, because that moment wasn't for social media. It was for me. For the girl who coded on dial-up, who fixed the school's broken computers for lunch credit, who taught herself Python when Claire was still learning to contour. And yet, at family dinners, I was still the quiet one, the one who didn't understand real life, the one who brought pie instead of a boyfriend. I started noticing the gaps, how my name disappeared from family group texts, how my successes never made it to the family newsletter Mom sent out every New Year. Last year, she wrote, "Claire is thriving at her marketing firm, just got promoted again. We're so proud, nothing about me." Not even a mention of the time I testified before Congress on cybersecurity risks. Claire once joked, "Maybe if you worked with people instead of machines, you'd have more to share." I laughed, but something cracked. So when Apex invited me to keynote the national summit, I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not Claire. I just booked my flight to Ohio, rented a sedan, packed my IEE plaque beside a dark blazer, and drove straight toward the house where my name was always the afterthought. This time I wasn't coming for approval, I was coming with proof. Not to beg for respect, but to walk in it. Would they recognize who I'd become? Or would they only see the girl they never clapped for? Either way, I was done waiting, and tomorrow they'd hear my name over the loudspeakers they used to ignore. The table was set for 4, but it felt like 3. Susan passed the potatoes to Claire first. David poured wine only into his and Claire's glasses. No one asked if I wanted any. Claire reached for the salt, bumping into my water glass. It tipped, spilled across my side of the table. She barely noticed. Oops, she said, dabbing it with a single paper napkin, then went right back to talking about her firm's client party. No one looked at me. I blotted the mess with the corner of my sleeve. They were still talking when I slipped away to the kitchen. Same linoleum, same floral curtains, same fridge covered in Claire's real estate magnets and selfies with her boss. Not a single photo of me. The freezer door stuck like always, inside a half-eaten chocolate pie, labeled Claire's favorite. I closed it slowly as if that might change the truth. When I returned, Susan was laughing at something Claire said. "I swear your new intern is just obsessed with you," Mom cooed. "She should be. I run that office," Claire smirked. David chuckled. Takes after her mother, natural leader. I sat down without a sound. No one asked where I'd gone. No one noticed. The next 10 minutes passed like static. Claire showed pictures of her condo's new backsplash. Susan commented on every tile. I chewed my dry chicken in silence. Then Susan turned to me suddenly, remembering I existed. "You still doing that? What is it again, data stuff?" I blinked. "Cybersecurity," I said. "Oh, right, that tech thing. It's cute you stuck with it." Cute. I glanced at the badge still resting in my purse, the one with my name embossed in gold, the one she didn't bother to ask about. Claire leaned back in her chair. "Well, at least you're not stuck in customer service anymore." I blinked. I was never in customer service. Claire shrugged. "Close enough." My chest felt tight, the air thicker than before, the same weight I carried every time I came home. They still saw me as the kid with the laptop in the basement, not the woman securing national networks, not the one they called when bills piled up and credit cards maxed out, just Lauren, the backup daughter. I pushed back my chair. The legs screeched against the floor. Claire winced. "I have an early morning," I said. No one stopped me. No one asked what I was doing tomorrow. They didn't know, and they didn't care to, but they would. Soon, upstairs, the guest room still smelled like old books and dryer sheets. A faded quilt covered the twin bed. My childhood desk sat in the corner, dusty and untouched. On it, Claire's senior photo smiled back at me from a silver frame. My graduation photo wasn't there. It never had been. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, and pulled out my phone. 12 unread emails, 3 from Apex Logistics, 1 from Rachel Nguyen, "Excited to see you shine tomorrow." I exhaled. Then a text from Susan. Not a question, a request. "Can you check the washing machine? It's making a noise again. No thank you for coming. No good luck tomorrow." Just the usual expectation that I'd fix things in silence. I left the phone face down on the nightstand. Instead, I opened my laptop. Familiar blue glow, my comfort, my proof. Lines of code felt more honest than their smiles downstairs. No pretending, no shrinking. I stared at the keynote deck I'd finalize tomorrow. 90 slides, 10 industry executives, 4 years of uncredited labor, finally with my name on it. My eyes burned, but I couldn't sleep. Not with Claire's voice still echoing in my skull. "Cute you stuck with it." She said it like I was a toddler still playing with Legos. I opened the bank app out of habit. The transaction history stared back. $180,000. That's how much I'd funneled into this family over the last 5 years. Mortgage, medication, car repairs. Claire's dental emergency covered by the daughter who works with data or something. I remembered the worst transfer. Mom had called me crying. Your dad. The hospital. The insurance denied. I wired $6,400 within minutes. Claire posted a beach photo that same day. Caption, finally unplugging. I deserve this. That photo never left my memory. I clicked it again. It was still there, still smug, and still no one had ever asked how I was doing. Not once, not even after I'd given up my down payment to keep their lights on. I shut the laptop too hard. The screen flickered, then faded to black. Just like my patience. The next morning, the kitchen was already noisy. Susan clanged pans like war drums. Claire scrolled through her phone, feet tucked under her on the couch. David was in the garage cursing at the lawnmower. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Black. No cream left again. No one had bothered to ask what I liked. Maybe they never knew. Claire looked up briefly. You still using that smartwatch? I feel like tech's always listening. I smiled thinly. It's how I stay 10 steps ahead. Susan didn't look up from the stove. She was burning toast. Again. I sat at the kitchen island. The same spot where I did algebra at 14. Where I built my first web page at 16. Where they told me it's just a phase, Lauren. Don't get your hopes up. My badge sat quietly in my purse, beside a flash drive, holding every keynote slide, every breach prevention model I'd helped design. I could hear David still grumbling outside. Then a knock at the front door. Susan wiped her hands, opened it. A woman in a black blazer stood with a clipboard. Sharp bob, confident tone. She extended her hand. Hi, I'm with Apex Systems. We're just confirming conference arrivals. Claire leaned over from the couch. Wait, Apex, that's the company Mom works with, right? Susan nodded. I'm HR liaison for their regional group. She glanced at the woman. Oh, are you with Keynote Logistics? The woman smiled. No, I'm assisting the lead consultant. Then she looked past Susan, saw me. Her eyes lit up. There you are, she said. Ms. Mitchell, Rachel's expecting you at noon. Everything's prepped. Claire froze. Susan turned, her spatula still in hand. David stepped inside just in time to hear it. You're the keynote, Susan whispered. I stood, smooth, calm, poured the rest of my coffee into the sink. Yes, I said. I'm the one running the entire Apex cybersecurity rollout. Claire's mouth opened, then closed. David blinked, twice. I thought you were just consulting, he said. I nodded. Led consulting, national oversight, policy direction, and system architecture. Susan's fingers clenched the spatula. Oh, I reached into my purse, took out the badge, held it up. This is who I've been for years, I said quietly. Then I turned to the Apex rep. Let's go. As we stepped outside, the wind picked up, cold against my cheeks, alive. Behind me, no one followed. No one called out. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to. The Apex headquarters glistened under the midday sun. Tall glass panels reflected a world I'd built piece by piece. It felt surreal walking into the building that held everything I'd poured myself into, the place where my name actually meant something. The security guard nodded as I flashed my badge. Morning, Miss Mitchell, I smiled. Morning, Dan. I stepped through the revolving doors and into the heart of the company. Cold air, the scent of fresh espresso, clicking heels on tile, monitors humming with motion. This wasn't just work, it was mine. At the 14th floor, the elevator opened directly into the executive suite. Rachel Nguyen was already there, sleek ponytail tablet in hand. You're early, she said with a grin. Old habit, I replied. She tapped the glass screen. You ready to show them what real leadership looks like? I nodded, but before I could speak, I saw two figures in the lobby through the glass, Susan and Claire. My chest tightened. What are they doing here? I asked. Rachel followed my gaze. HR brought in regional liaisons for the pre-conference walkthrough. She raised an eyebrow. You didn't know? I shook my head. No, they didn't tell me they'd be here. Rachel touched my arm gently. I can have someone walk them through another floor if you want. I considered it, for a moment, then straightened my spine. No, let's go meet them. The double doors hissed open as we stepped into the lounge. Susan looked up from a tray of name tags. Claire stood by the coffee urn, stirring aggressively. Susan's eyes went wide. Lauren! Rachel nodded toward me. Meet our lead consultant and keynote speaker, Lauren Mitchell. Claire dropped the stir stick. It clattered against the tile. I didn't realize you were presenting, Susan stammered. I'm not just presenting, I said. I've been running this project for the last 2 years. Claire stepped closer, eyes scanning my face like she was seeing it for the first time. You're the one who reviewed our department's access policy, she asked. I nodded, among other things. Rachel glanced between us. Lauren designed the entire encryption framework. You've been using her system for months. Susan's lips parted. Nothing came out. Rachel turned to her. Your HR audit passed last quarter because of her data integrity protocols. The silence was thick, uncomfortable. Claire fidgeted with her lanyard. Susan blinked slow and unsteady. Then she whispered it. We didn't know. I looked right at her. You never asked. For a moment, no one moved. Even the hum of the conference monitors felt louder than the silence between us. Susan lowered her gaze. Claire looked like she wanted to say something but didn't know how to begin. Rachel glanced at her tablet. Prep starts in 10. Lauren, you want to walk the stage? I nodded, but before I followed, I turned back. Actually, give me 2 minutes. Rachel gave me a knowing look, then walked off, heels tapping with precision. Claire finally spoke. You've really been running this whole thing? I raised an eyebrow. I've been in DC for 3 years, overseeing Apex's national restructuring, the same timeline as your HR portal migration, the same system your team couldn't log into for weeks until I rewrote it overnight. Claire winced. I thought that was some external vendor. I smiled. I was that vendor. Susan crossed her arms. Her tone softened, but her pride hadn't fully cracked. You could have told us. I could have, I said. But you were too busy calling it tech nonsense. I leaned forward, voice level. You never cared what I did, only when it benefited you. Susan swallowed. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is wiring money to cover your bills while being mocked over meatloaf. Claire looked away. I didn't mean to make you feel invisible. You didn't have to mean it, I replied. You just had to keep laughing when Mom said I'd never survive without a real career. The room pulsed with tension. Susan reached for something to say, then let her hand drop to her side. Why didn't you tell us about the keynote, she asked. I looked her in the eye. Because it wasn't for you. It was for every girl who built a future in silence, who funded everyone else's dream while being told hers didn't matter. Claire bit her lip. She looked down at the floor, then up again. Is there any part of you that wants to fix this? I paused. That ache in my chest flared again, not anger, not revenge. Exhaustion. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want respect, and maybe finally a seat at the table where I've always belonged. Susan's eyes glistened. She looked older than I remembered, not weak, but weathered. Then let us listen now, she whispered. I didn't reply, not yet. I turned, walked toward the main hall, and didn't look back. The ballroom buzzed with low voices and bright screens. Rows of executives in tailored suits filled the front. Stage lights warmed the air like anticipation. I stood backstage, fingers wrapped around the clicker. My slides were ready. My name was printed on the event banner, bold, unmistakable. I breathed in, held it, let it go. Claire and Susan sat in the third row now. Rachel had reserved their seats without asking me. I didn't stop her. The MC introduced me with crisp authority. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Lauren Mitchell, lead consultant for Apex National Security Infrastructure. Applause rose, not thunderous, but solid, earned. I stepped into the light. The first few words caught in my throat, not because I was nervous, because I remembered. All the times I'd spoken and no one listened. All the years my voice hit walls that never echoed back. Not today. I launched into the presentation, breach prevention models, cross-department redundancies, behavioral encryption protocols. Every term, every diagram, every metric had my signature beneath it, silent but powerful. Halfway through, I caught Claire watching me differently, not with condescension, but something closer to awe. Susan didn't take notes, she just stared. I finished with the last slide, a simple quote I'd added last minute. Respect isn't earned by proving your worth. It's revealed by who notices it without asking. The room stilled, for one heartbeat, then another, then applause again. Rachel stood first. Others followed. When I stepped down, Susan was waiting near the hallway. "Lauren," she said softly. Her voice was unsteady. I didn't stop walking, but I slowed. She caught up beside me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not rushed, not defensive, just raw. "For the years I made you feel like nothing," she added. "For treating your silence like insignificance." I stopped, turned toward her. "You didn't make me feel like nothing," I said. "You made me fight like hell to be something." Susan blinked fast, her mascara smudged slightly. "I want to do better," she said. I nodded. "That's up to you." Claire walked over, hesitated. "I was jealous," she said, barely audible. "You made everything look effortless, and I couldn't stand not being the star anymore." I looked at her, really looked. There was a crack in the armor now, not enough to fix everything, but maybe enough to start. "I never wanted a spotlight," I said. Just a light that wasn't turned off when I walked in the room. They both stood there quiet. No more excuses, no more masks. I turned toward the exit, and for once they didn't walk ahead of me. They followed. I didn't go to the after party. While executives toasted in the hotel lounge, I slipped away to the rooftop parking deck. The air was cool, quiet, the kind of silence I used to crave until it started to feel like exile. My heels echoed across the concrete. I leaned against the rail, staring out at the city skyline. Glass towers, streetlights, little glowing windows filled with people who might never know what it costs to be overlooked. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. "You are flawless. Press wants an interview, want me to forward." I typed a simple, "not yet," because I didn't want more noise, I wanted to breathe. But another buzz came through, this time not work. "Claire, do you have 5 minutes? I'm still here." I hesitated, then replied. "Top level, alone." 10 minutes later, she stepped into the open air. No heels, no makeup touch-up, just Claire, plain unsure, carrying 2 paper cups. She handed me one. "Decaf vanilla latte," she said. "I remember you liked it." I took the cup. "I didn't think you noticed." She leaned beside me, resting her arms on the rail. "I didn't," she admitted, "but I should have." The steam rose between us, soft, fragile, like truce. "I didn't come up here to fix everything," she said. "I came to ask, how did you not hate us?" I looked at her, eyes softer now, not sharp, just tired. "I did," I whispered, "for a long time." Claire nodded slowly. "I don't blame you," she said. "Sometimes I hated you too, for being better, for not needing anyone." I laughed low and bitter. "I needed you more than you think." Neither of us spoke for a while. The lights of the city blinked below. Traffic moved like blood through veins, alive, constant. Claire turned to me. "Do you think it's too late to change things?" I didn't answer yet, because I didn't know. Not fully. We stood there like strangers who remembered they used to be sisters, not allies, but not enemies anymore either. Claire sipped her drink. I noticed her hand was trembling, not from the cold, but from something deeper, regret maybe. "I used to think you were trying to prove something," she said, "like you always had to be better, sharper, untouchable." "I was," I said, "because the alternative was being invisible." She flinched. I know that now, she whispered. The rooftop lights flickered, some motion sensor picking up on our stillness. A car alarm echoed faintly in the distance, then faded. Claire looked out toward the highway. Did you really send all that money? I nodded, every cent. I never told anyone. What would have been the point? I shrugged. You'd already decided I didn't matter. I figured quiet support was better than loud rejection. She let that sit, didn't argue. Then I'm not doing great at work. I blinked. Claire never admitted that. Not even when her condo flooded and she blamed the pipes instead of her unpaid HOA fees. What's going on? I asked cautiously. She exhaled. My team doesn't respect me. My numbers are tanking. I feel like I'm faking it half the time. And I can't ask Mom, she still thinks I've got it all figured out. Her voice cracked at the end. The confident facade flickered, then dropped. I watched her closely, not with judgment, but with something like recognition. I knew that feeling, the dread of being found out, the weight of pretending. Claire looked over. Do you think I could learn what you do, not the code, but how to lead without faking it? I didn't answer right away, because part of me still hurt. Still remembered every eye roll, every mocking laugh. But the other part of me, the woman who climbed alone and learned to stay quiet, understood how lonely it was to pretend you didn't need help. So I said maybe, if you're ready to listen this time. Claire nodded. I am. The next morning, Claire showed up at the conference again. No blazer, no designer bag. Just a notebook in her hand. She sat in the back this time, quiet, taking notes as I led a panel on data sovereignty. Afterward, she waited outside the room, didn't push, didn't pretend. I didn't understand any of that, she said with a sheepish smile, but I want to. We found a quiet table in the atrium. Glass ceilings let the morning light pour in. The scent of strong coffee drifted between tables. Colleagues passed by, nodding, whispering my name with respect. Claire noticed and didn't shrink. I forgot how smart you are, she said, then corrected herself. No, I think I just never took the time to notice. That landed softer than I expected. I tapped her notebook. If you're serious, I can show you where to start. But it's not easy. No shortcuts. I don't want shortcuts, she replied. I want to rebuild. With you. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was something. After our meeting, I stepped outside into the crisp air. Susan was waiting near the fountain, a paper bag in her hands. She handed it to me wordlessly. Inside, my childhood science fair medal, polished, hung on a navy ribbon. I found it in the attic, she said. I thought I threw it away, but I didn't. I held it carefully, like something sacred. Not because it was worth anything, but because she finally saw it. Saw me. Thank you, I said. I'm sorry, she replied. I should have been proud sooner. I nodded. She didn't ask for a hug. I didn't offer one. But the silence between us no longer felt cold, just unfinished and open. As I walked back inside, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter anymore. I felt like the woman who built her own worth and finally quietly was seen. What would you do if the people who ignored you suddenly asked for guidance? Would you say yes or walk away? 3 weeks after this conference, I stood in front of my old apartment door in DC, key in hand, suitcase at my side, and a different woman behind my eyes. The place smelled like cedar and ink, old notebooks stacked by the window, my journal still open on the desk right where I left it. The last line read, "Say it even if no one listens." I dropped my bag and walked barefoot to the kitchen. Same cracked mug, same tea I'd always save for Sundays, but the silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was mine. That night, I opened a new page in the journal. Entry post-conference clarity. Mom said sorry. Claire wants to learn. But do they want me or what I can teach them? The pen paused in my hand. What do I want now? My phone buzzed. Rachel. Bye. Lauren, have you seen the press article? They're asking for a feature piece. Also, there's interest from a policy group. Public sector partnership. I smiled. Not because of the attention, but because I didn't need it to feel seen anymore. Still, I replied, yes, let's move forward. But I need boundaries this time. Then I opened my laptop and created a new folder, the Whitmore Protocols. Not just code, not just security frameworks. A roadmap for women building systems while holding families on their backs. It was time. The next morning, I called my lawyer, not to change a will, to start a fund. I want it quiet. Targeted, I told him. Scholarships, mentorships, for women in tech who've carried everyone else. He paused. Name for the fund. I didn't hesitate. The Elise Foundation. My middle name, the part no one ever said out loud. The part I built everything on. That afternoon, I got a message from Claire. Got a bad review today. Tried your boundary setting script. Didn't cry. Can we talk this weekend? I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked to my window, looked out at the Potomac sunlight flickering across the water. A hawk circled above, unafraid, unapologetic. Then I typed back, sure, but bring a pen and humility. Saturday afternoon, Claire showed up early, hair in a bun, notebook in hand. And this time she knocked. I opened the door, still holding a tea towel. You're 20 minutes early, I said. She shrugged. I didn't want to mess this up. The old Claire would have said, be grateful I made time. This Claire. She waited for me to finish drying the dishes. I motioned to the dining table. Sit, I said. Let's start with the difference between authority and performance. She pulled out a pen, clicked it, then looked at me. I'm listening. We went through real scenarios, how to hold a team accountable without apology, how to ask for clarity without shrinking. She took notes, lots of them, but halfway through she looked up. You really did all this alone? I paused, then nodded. Most days I was too tired to be angry, just focused. Like if I stopped for 1 second, I'd fall apart. Claire blinked. I used to think you were cold. I wasn't, I said. I was just never allowed to be soft. She wrote that down. Later, we sat on the couch, 2 mugs of rooibos tea between us. No wine, no distractions, just air. Then she asked something I didn't expect. Do you think Mom ever felt invisible too? I turned to her slowly. I think Mom was raised to survive, not reflect. And when I didn't fit the version of daughter she recognized, she tuned me out. Claire stared at the tea leaves swirling in her cup. She says she wants to meet, just you and her. I didn't answer right away. The last conversation with Susan still sat in my chest like a weight, heavy, but no longer suffocating. I'll think about it, I said. Claire nodded, didn't push, didn't beg. When she left, I stood at the window again. This time, I didn't feel like I had to watch the world to feel it moving. It was moving through me now, with clarity and choice. I agreed to meet Susan at a neutral place. Not the house, not her office. Just a quiet cafe near the water with chipped tables and handwritten menus. I arrived early, ordered chamomile tea, sat by the window. Outside, seagulls pecked at breadcrumbs. Inside, my pulse ticked louder than the jazz playing overhead. Then she walked in. Cardigan, slacks, clutch bag pressed to her side like armor, but her shoulders weren't as squared as I remembered. She looked smaller, not weaker, just human. Hi, she said, eyes searching, not scanning, not judging, searching. I nodded to the chair across from me. She sat. The server came and went. She ordered black coffee, no sugar, just like Dad. There was a long pause, not awkward, but loaded. Then she spoke. I read your article, she said. The one about cybersecurity equity. The part where you said, we don't just build systems, we protect lives. I nodded. She looked down. I never knew you felt that way. You never asked. Another silence. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a small box, pushed it across the table. I don't expect this to fix anything, she said, but I wanted you to have it. I opened it. A photo, tattered at the corners. Me, age 13, standing by my first science project, grinning, alone. I kept it, she whispered. I just didn't display it. I was scared you'd leave if I showed pride too soon. Like if I celebrated you, I'd lose you faster. I stared at the picture, at the girl I used to be, who wanted nothing more than her mother's eyes to stay on her. I didn't leave because you celebrated me, I said. I left because you didn't. Susan closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. I'm proud of you, Lauren, not just for the work, for how you stayed kind. That almost broke me. Not the words, the fact that she finally meant them. I slipped the photo into my coat pocket. Not forgiveness, not yet. But something was lighter. I don't need an apology anymore, I said. But I do need space, respect, and no more pretending like nothing happened. She nodded. Tears welled, but she didn't cry. I can do that, she whispered. We stood, no hug, just a long look. And for the first time, I walked away without guilt or need, just peace. Would you open the door again if the person who hurt you finally knocked with honesty? The idea came quietly, not like a spark, more like a hum beneath the surface. It started the night I couldn't sleep. I just reread a mentorship request from a girl in Idaho, 17, dropped from her robotics team after calling out a teacher's bias. Her message ended with, "Is it worth it building a future when no one claps for you?" I stared at that line for a long time, then opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, Project Second Circuit. Not a fund, not a scholarship, a movement. Built for girls like me, quiet, brilliant, underestimated. I spent the next week sketching frameworks between work calls, legal structure, partnership models, grant criteria for underrepresented women in STEM. Every night I journaled the same question. What would have changed if someone had believed in me earlier? By Friday, I had answers, a board list, budget projections, an anonymous donation plan seeded from my Apex bonus. I named the boardroom file, Legacy Not Luck, DF. That weekend, I drove out to Lake Barcroft. The cabin I'd been eyeing for years had finally gone up for sale. Cedar siding, moss-lined path, a wide porch that caught morning light like it was designed to hold hope. The realtor walked me through the main room, fireplace still warm from the last showing. Kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. It's quiet here, she said. I need quiet, I replied. I signed the contract that afternoon, in my full name. No cosigner, no family witness, just me. After closing, I drove back to the city, stopped at a local print shop, ordered a brass plaque with 6 simple words. And you're the system now, build it. I plan to nail it above the cabin's front door. A reminder that power doesn't come from approval, it comes from choosing to rise without it. Back at my apartment, I emailed Rachel. Subject: one last thing. Before I take a break, I want to present one more initiative. Not technical, structural. Let's talk legacy. She replied 10 minutes later. Yes, been waiting for this. I poured myself a glass of wine, watched the light shift across the floor, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I was creating. Claire found out before I told her. I should have expected that. She was still on a few internal Apex threads, and Rachel had mentioned my initiative during a meeting. She called me that evening, no small talk. You're launching something, she asked. Outside Apex. I leaned back on my couch, the laptop still warm on my legs. Yes, I said. It's called Second Circuit. Pause. What is it? A program for women in tech. The ones who get passed over, the ones who leave before anyone realizes what they could have built. Claire didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was smaller than usual. Why didn't you tell me? I closed the laptop. Because it wasn't for you, I said. Not at first. Another pause. Then she asked what I wasn't ready for. Can I be part of it? I stood and walked to the window. The city lights were blinking like signals coded deliberate. Claire had never joined anything she couldn't run, never asked to participate without control. What would you bring? I asked. She hesitated, then answered, perspective. The side of privilege that didn't know it was privilege. The voice that used to dismiss but finally learned to listen. It wasn't rehearsed, wasn't polished. It was real. Still, I needed to be sure. This isn't a redemption project, Claire. It's not about clearing guilt. I know, she said quickly. I want to build something that isn't just about me. Her voice cracked then. I spent years needing to be seen, and now I see what that cost the people around me. I let the silence linger. Then I said, let's start small. You'll help with outreach, behind the scenes, no spotlight, just work. Her exhale was audible. Deal. That night I added her name to the list, not as co-founder, not as legacy. As a learner, and beneath her name I typed one word in all caps, listen. Because that's where all change begins. Not with talking, with hearing what was ignored for too long. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a different kind of audience. No suits, no shareholders, just folding chairs, mismatched mugs, and women with stories behind their eyes. It was a co-op space tucked in a repurposed library outside Arlington. Worn wood floors, exposed brick, and a chalkboard that read, Second Circuit, you were never the problem. Claire sat in the back, no makeup, no clipboard, just a pen and an open page. I stepped up to the front, hands resting on the podium. Thank you for coming, I began. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and for a long time, I thought silence was strength. Murmurs, a few nods. I was told I was too cold, too technical, too quiet, too much of something they didn't want to understand. Louder now, resonance. But here's the truth, I wasn't too much. They were too afraid of what I represented. Control without apology, clarity without permission, and systems that didn't need their approval to function. A ripple of low laughter, a few hands tightened around coffee cups. We build everything, I said. Companies, families, emergency backup plans. And when those systems fail, we're the ones expected to patch the holes, quietly, without asking for credit. I paused. Second Circuit is here to end that. I clicked the remote, slides appeared on the screen, nothing flashy, just facts. Mentorship pods, emergency funding, tech coaching for women re-entering the field after burnout, policy support for first-gen coders in underfunded schools. Every piece designed to say you belong, even when they forget you built the door. I closed the presentation with one final slide, just white text on black background. You are not too late. You are just getting started. The room was quiet for a moment, then applause, slow, earnest, not corporate. When the crowd thinned, Claire approached. She looked at the screen again. You wrote that last line for yourself too, didn't you? She asked. I nodded. Yes, but I left it up there for everyone else. She smiled. Then surprisingly, she stayed to stack chairs, one after another, no announcement, no selfie, just work. And as the lights dimmed, I stepped outside into the cool dusk air, hands empty, heart full. The world hadn't changed. But I had, and now I was teaching others how to build their own systems, with no blueprint but their own. The invitation arrived on cream cardstock, embossed in silver. National Tech Honors Gala, finalist Lauren Mitchell. I stared at it for a full minute. The kind of recognition people spend decades chasing. A televised event, red carpet, press coverage, all of it. Rachel called 10 minutes later. You're the keynote, she said. They want a speech about your journey, from family rejection to national impact. I hesitated, then asked, "Did they read the part where I chose not to go public? They want you anyway." I said I'd think about it. That night, I sat at the lake cabin, fireplace crackling, tea cooling beside me. Outside, the wind rustled through pine branches. Inside, my laptop screen glowed with the draft of the speech I hadn't committed to. The cursor blinked, waiting. What would I say? That I built myself from ashes. No one even saw burn. That I gave without thanks and rose without applause. Did I need the room to hear it, or had I already said it where it mattered most? I shut the laptop. Claire called the next morning. "I just saw the announcement," she said. "I'm proud of you." I smiled, "Thanks." She paused. "You're going, right?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know yet." Claire exhaled. "I think you should. Not for them, for every girl watching." That stayed with me. All week, I started getting press inquiries, profiles, cover shoots. Everyone wanted the quiet powerhouse who never needed a mic. Irony, really. They wanted my voice now that I'd built something without theirs. Rachel checked in again. "You don't have to play by their rules," she said. "But this stage, it's yours now." I thought of the girls in Idaho, Chicago, Jackson. Emails still arriving telling me Second Circuit helped them ask for a raise, apply to grad school, leave a toxic job. I didn't need the stage, but maybe they did. Maybe this wasn't about whether I needed to be seen, but what visibility could do for others. So I said yes. And that night, I pulled the plaque from my desk drawer, the one from IEE, the one no one clapped for when it arrived. I laid it beside the invitation, smiled. This time the applause wasn't the destination, it was just background noise. The real work had already begun. The night of the gala, DC shimmered under soft gold lights. Hotel Montero's ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the entrance, their notes threading through the evening like silk. I arrived in a deep navy gown. No stylist, no entourage, just me and a folded copy of the Second Circuit mission tucked inside my clutch. Inside, people buzzed in polite clusters. Flashes popped. Champagne glasses clinked. Names floated through the air, mostly male. Then someone whispered mine. "That's her, Lauren Mitchell." Heads turned, some curious, some skeptical. One woman clapped quietly without breaking eye contact. I nodded. Rachel found me near the program table. She was radiant in silver, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "You look calm," she said. "I feel finished," I replied. Not tired, just clear. The ceremony began. Spotlights shifted across the stage. Names called. Bios read. Then the MC said mine. Lauren Mitchell, founder of Second Circuit, Apex lead, consultant, cybersecurity architect, an advocate for overlooked women in tech. Applause, bright, steady. I walked to the podium, heels clicking like punctuation marks. The lights felt hot, but I didn't flinch. I looked out at a sea of eyes waiting for a story, a struggle, a moment that would tie the arc into something marketable. But I had something else. I took a breath. "Thank you," I began. "Most of you don't know me, and years ago I would have seen that as failure." A pause, quiet, because I worked behind the curtain, because I wired money silently, because I led without being seen. The audience shifted, leaning in, but that silence taught me something, that what we build in the dark often outlasts what's celebrated in the light. A few heads nodded. I saw Rachel close her eyes briefly. Claire, sitting near the back, mouthed the word yes. I continued. "I was told to stay small, to stop chasing things I couldn't explain at a dinner table. But I didn't stop, and I didn't build alone. I unfolded a small card, held it in the air. This is our real legacy. Every woman who gave without applause, who left jobs with dignity they were never paid for, who raised futures while burying their own." I placed the card on the podium. Tonight, if you hear my name and feel something move, you're not alone. You're already building your own second circuit, even if no one claps yet. Silence. Then thunderous applause, not performative, not polite, real. And I didn't smile for the cameras. I smiled for the girl I used to be coding in a basement while the world forgot she existed. After the gala, I didn't stay for photos, no interviews, no press line. I walked out the side exit heels in hand, cold air brushing against my shoulders. Freedom doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it slips in when no one's watching. Claire caught up to me outside. She wore flats, hair windblown, eyes brighter than I'd seen in years. That was everything she said, breathless. I think half the room wanted to cry. I shrugged gently. I didn't write it for the room. We walked in silence toward the valet, just sisters now, no scoreboard between us. Claire slipped her arm through mine. "Can I help with the next Second Circuit cohort?" she asked. "Nothing big, just whatever you need." This time I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "but you'll need to listen twice as much as you lead. I can do that." Our cars pulled up. She got in hers first, rolled down the window. "By the way, Mom watched the live stream." My breath caught. She hadn't texted, hadn't called. Claire continued, "She cried during your last sentence." I nodded, unsure what to feel. "She wanted me to tell you," Claire added. "But I think she knew you might not care." She was right. I didn't need her tears. I needed her to remember who I became without her approval. And now, she would. When I got home, I changed into a hoodie and sat on the floor. No spotlight, no noise. Just a folder of messages waiting in my inbox. One stood out. Not the subject. "My name is Tasha. I'm 16. I watched your speech." The body of the message read, "Everyone tells me I'm too much, too loud, too fast. But tonight I saw someone who made that sound like a strength. Thank you for not staying quiet." I reread it 3 times, then saved it to a folder labeled Legacy. Not for ego, for clarity. Because this was the fallout that mattered. Not headlines, but impact. Not forgiveness, but transformation. And as I shut the laptop and turned off the lights, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not closure, but continuation. Because the story wasn't over, and neither was mine. I moved into the cabin in early spring. Birdsong greeted me before sunrise. The lake shimmered like a mirror that didn't ask me to smile. For once, I wasn't performing. Just living. I unpacked slowly, books first, then my notebooks, then the plaque I never hung until now. Above the fireplace, I drilled 2 small hooks. The brass plate gleamed in the morning light. "You are the system now. Build it." It fit, better than any family photo ever did. Every Sunday, I lit a fire and read letters, real ones, printed and creased from travel. Girls who had spoken at their first town hall, women who asked for raises, one retired teacher who launched a coding club for single mothers in Detroit. They didn't need me, not really, but they needed a signal that they weren't alone. That someone somewhere had walked the hard road and left a light on behind her. Claire visited once a month. She brought groceries, wore less eyeliner, and asked more questions. One afternoon, she sat on the porch swing staring out at the water. "You know," she said, "Mom keeps asking if she can come too." I didn't look at her, just sipped my tea. "She says she's proud, not just of your work, but how you didn't let her undo you." I nodded. Pride is easy when it's safe. Claire winced a little, but she didn't defend her. "She's been going to therapy," she added. I smiled, a quiet one. "That's between her and the therapist." Claire turned toward me. "Do you hate her?" "No," I said. "I just don't build houses where I was once told to shrink." She didn't speak after that. The wind moved through the pine trees. A hawk passed overhead. We sat there a long time. No resolution, no climax. Just truth, the kind that doesn't need a witness. That summer, I was invited to speak at 3 universities. All-women panels, 1 keynote, 2 closed workshops. I declined the first 2. The third came with a handwritten note. We're not asking for a speech. We're asking for your presence, to show our girls what it looks like to survive and still stay soft. I said yes. It wasn't a stage, just a circle of folding chairs under string lights on a campus lawn. 30 students, most of them quiet. One cried before I even spoke. I didn't lecture. I told stories about the basement laptop, the bank account that became a lifeline, the dinner tables where no one listened, the badge, the girl who emailed me from Idaho, and the plaque that finally found a wall. One girl asked, "How did you know when you were finally respected?" I paused, then said, when I stopped needing to hear it out loud. Afterward, they gathered around like daughters I never had, not to take pictures, to ask real questions. What do you do when your mom only sees your sister? Did you ever stop loving them even when it hurt? How do you lead without losing yourself? I didn't have perfect answers, but I answered anyway. That night, one of them slipped a note into my bag. I found it when I got home. And your story made me feel less crazy, less invisible, more possible. That word stayed with me, possible. Not perfect, not complete, just possible. The next morning, I updated the Second Circuit website. I added a new page, Letters We Keep. Anonymized, unedited stories from women who rebuilt themselves quietly. No gloss, no filter. Just truth, the kind we carry when the world refuses to. By noon, the first 10 entries came in. I read each one with the reverence of someone holding broken glass that still caught light. Then I shut the laptop, stepped outside, and let the sun hit my face like an answer. Fall came early that year. The leaves outside the cabin turned amber crisp against the still lake. Change didn't knock loudly anymore. It arrived like morning light, soft, inevitable. One afternoon, a box arrived on my porch. No name on the return label, just my own initials, LEM, scrawled in blue ink. Inside a frame, my E award newly mounted beside a photo I hadn't seen in years. Me at 15. Sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, a screwdriver in one hand, an open radio in the other. Claire must have found it. Taped to the back was a note. This time we display it where people see, even if it's only us. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I hung it near the front door next to the brass plaque. Then I lit a candle. The cedar scent curled through the room like memory. That night I wrote one final entry in my journal. Legacy isn't the echo of applause. It's the quiet someone carries after hearing your story and choosing to keep going. I closed the journal, slid it into the drawer with the letters, the real archive. No one might ever read it, but it existed. And that was enough. Before bed, I checked the Second Circuit inbox. A message sat at the top, John's subject. My mother never believed in me, but you did. It ended with, "Yeah, I'm applying to MIT, and I used your story in my essay." I smiled. Then turned off the screen, no fanfare, no alert, just one small light on the porch still burning, and a world that no longer felt indifferent. I stepped outside. The wind brushed against my skin like a reminder. I had built something they couldn't ignore, but more importantly, I'd become someone I didn't need to explain anymore. They saw me now, but more than that, I saw myself. Your story isn't over, and neither is mine. If you've been there quietly rebuilding, this space was made for you. If you've ever been the quiet one, the one who gave without being seen, then you know this story isn't just fiction. It's familiar, it's yours. Legacy doesn't always look like applause. Sometimes it looks like finally being able to rest, knowing you didn't need permission to matter. Where are you listening from? Have you ever rebuilt yourself in silence? Share your story below. This space was made for you, and for every woman who's still building quietly, powerfully, without apology. And if these stories speak to you, subscribe to In Reddit Story for more real stories about justice, healing, and quiet empowerment after 40.